You're listening to the official podcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles, a community of individuals and families connecting with God to change the world.
I want to invite those who are still up to grab a seat and again extend a welcome. And as Sandra mentioned, this summer we've set out to engage the 10 Commandments that were initially given to Moses as the people were being led out of Egypt and out of being enslaved as a people into becoming a nation and given freedom. And so this is what God is speaking about then how to live and what does it mean to flourish now. And these are these commandments or instructions of that. And we often, think of these as ways that are confinement, but in truth, this is all about, and we're seeking to discover afresh, to hear how this speaks into flourishing. And G.K. Chesterton, who maybe a few of you are aware of, was deemed one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. He was one who was highly esteemed and considered a huge influence by C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, who some of you know from Lord of the Rings. He had a huge impact on shaping and leading them to their faith and their knowledge of God. And Mahatma Gandhi looked to him and said he's one of the most influential and took hold of everything he read. And in his own journey, G.K. Chesterton, in his book Orthodoxy, says this. He says, "The more I considered Christianity, the more I found that while it had established a rule and order, the chief aim of that order was to give room for good things to run wild." And that, I think, captures profoundly God's heart for us to be able to hear what he's saying, that this is God's desire for us to understand what God wants is room for good things to run wild in our world, but also in your life for good things to run wild. So as we've looked over this past week, God begins speaking of what it means to live a life centered in him. And he begins with the first commandment. And he says, essentially, to paraphrase, you've got to put me first. And secondly, you've got to get rid of any substitutes, any idols. And thirdly, you've got to recognize that I cannot be used by not allowing yourself to take a name in vain, to think that we can bring God down and control him and use him. We will lose reality that way. And fourthly, you've got to maintain a regular position of resting in his power and in his provision, and to live in that place of rest, lest we find ourselves thinking and acting and trying to live as if we're God and have to and can do everything. And so he calls them into that place of Sabbath rest. And now we come to this juncture in which God begins to speak the instructions about how we then relate to one another. And we come then to this fifth commandment, which speaks to the most formative of all relationships, the one that connects so much between God and how we live. And we read these words. I invite you to read them aloud with me together in Exodus 20, verse 12. You can read from the screen. Let's read this aloud together. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Honor your father and your mother. Those are words that can strike us as we sit with them and have them before us. Can strike our souls in a number of ways. Maybe on one hand you kind of have a little amen to that. There's another part that's going, oh no, oh no, that just strikes at some really hard places. The truth is, whatever our past, our relationship with our parents have been, these words really literally are close to home, very close to home. Hope, I think, close to the deepest parts of our formative selves. I know that I have 4 kids, and they're all in this stage of individuation. So we're at that point where we're thinking, is there going to be any honor left when this is over? I'm not hearing a whole lot. I'm hearing a whole lot of, I am, And so I wonder, and as some of you may recall, my own parents just passed away very close to each other just about 3 years ago. And out of that, it just struck me, my desire to honor, it became like a point in which I am struck by this in the other side of life. And I think these commands, they kind of drop like a plumb line. You have something built and you're not sure how straight it is till you drop a plumb line, and it kind of shows by gravity how straight it is. And so these words might drop on our lives and kind of raise that sense of how am I in terms of this reality and living this out. And I think they are very hard. I think the truth is these words are some of the most sensitive words, and they're also the most central of words. They speak to something so sensitive because, on one hand, many of us may have had great parents who knew how to live well and love well, and so honor flows very freely, but for so many of us, I know that life has not been that way. And so we naturally hit these questions and we think, how can I be called to honor? How could I honor my father and my mother when perhaps I had a broken home and they split up and I felt abandoned in that? Or maybe I never even knew one of my parents because I really was abandoned. Or maybe worse so, I felt abused and maybe really was abused, physically abused or emotionally abused. And there was something that actually hurt and harmed my life, things that were never said that should have been said, and things that were said that should never have been said. How do I honor this and honor my father and mother when perhaps they've already passed on? And we're left thinking, is that even possible then? In every way, these words can strike so deep, and they speak to the deepest, I believe, the deepest longings and the deepest losses that we've had in life. And that's a place of very real personal pain. Very personal pain. And without wanting to be simplistic, but believing this deeply, I believe God really knows that place of pain. In fact, I think far more than you can imagine, He knows the pain that we have because He knows what parents were meant to be. In other words, I think the pain points to the potential. I think the reason this is so sensitive is because it's also so central. And the truth is, I don't know anyone who doesn't long to honor their father and mother. That the struggle is, can I, given my own reality with them? But we long for it. Why? Because there's something in us that knows this is central. It is central to life, and that's why it shouldn't surprise us that as this change kind of comes and you see God beginning to speak now about how we are to live in relationship to one another, He begins right here with the family at the center, because the family is central. The family is the center of God's own intent. It was His idea that our lives would be shaped by being birthed by two people coming together, and they would co-create with God life, our lives, and that's a profound thing, and the truth is, wherever that goes well, everything flows from it goes well, and vice versa. And so when the family does well, and strong families make strong communities, and strong communities make strong nations. And where the family doesn't do well, everything crumbles. Everything crumbles, and that's so much of what we can see today as we look around us. Curtis Jones said this. He said, there's a crisis in America. It's as crucial as civil rights, dangerous as bureaucracy, as insidious as communism, as unpredictable as politics, as uncontrollable as inflation. It's the erosion of the home. And I think there's some truth to that. If you kind of think of all the things that everything is focused on, and crises, and what's going on with the economy, and what's going on with conflicts, there's a huge crisis we don't even know how to talk about sometimes, and that's just the crisis of our own relationships within a home. And I think we're so lost in this, and the truth is, it is so central. And so it is that we see this is the one commandment that, as many say, comes with a promise, or I would say better, it comes with a consequence. Did you notice that when God says, honor your father and mother, so in other words, there's something that comes from it. What was that? That you might live long in the land that God is giving you, the land of promise, that we live well in that. And so it is, it's essential to living well, he says. And I think it should strike us then that if we want to live well, we would think of these words well. And why is honoring parents at the core of living well and doing well in life. I think to really hear this clearly, to hear these words, we need to remember that these words are God telling you and I about reality. They are not being used as a weapon from one side of the parental-child relationship to another, right? Because that's what we all hear. We hear these words and go, yep, I heard that one. I remember when I got a little feisty, somebody out there said, honor your father and mother, and it's like this weapon, and you come into parenthood and you kind of reach that point where suddenly you find yourself just on the edge of selling your kids to traveling gypsies, and you decide to right before that, you're like, honor them, or you will not be living in this land very long, You will not be in the land of the living, and you're just on the edge of that, So we pull this. So we relate to this as kind of this thing that gets used to tell us what we need to do. That's not who said it. It's God speaking these words to us. And God, as we've seen through this, is not telling us about rules, arbitrary rules about the way you ought to do things because he thinks it's a preferable way. He's telling us about reality. This is what's real, and if you line your life around reality, it will go well for you. So what is it about honoring your father and mother, the role? What is it that is held there? How is it essential to living well? Well, the first of those things I would suggest is, and these are things I think we can draw out from the scriptures, is that honoring our parents roots our lives in life's larger story. That life has a larger story than we can see in our youth, and we will not know it. We will not be rooted in it. The truth is that when we're young, life is we can't see much bigger, and so we see things in only so much of a spectrum of things. And as a result, our identities are kind of, fleeting. We're kind of moving about, who am I? What's my identity? What am I rooted in? It's fleeting. It can be kind of shallow. We can sell ourselves to anybody or any idea. And yet, there is a larger story. There's a larger story, and that's what the parents can root us in, is they speak into that story, and they root us in that place. You might remember in the movie The Lion King, which many of us saw, right? And young Simba is conflicted about what he's to do, and he's kind of run away from the clan. He doesn't know his role in the clan anymore. And the moment comes where he's to take up his role, but he's not there. And then that booming voice, right? That booming voice of his father that's, from the heavens somehow speaking. And what does he say? Remember who you are. And there he's awakened, and he sees in himself the larger story and his deeper identity. And that's what Jesus comes to bring into life. He's saying, I'm here to make sure to bring the power of the Father's voice to your life, that you might remember who you really are. And parents, in a sense, mediate that. They have the power to help root us in that. And to be able to say, you're part of something larger than you realize right now. And we see this unfolding, and we look into history, we see the power of this in the Jewish people themselves. They are exiles, and there are nations after nations and cultures after cultures that want to just distinguish them, right? So they can enslave them. How would they stay rooted? How would they keep their identity in a larger story? Well, they looked to the older, and the older told stories, and they continued to hold that identity. No, you are a people who God called. You're a people who have a higher calling than what you're being told here. And it is that one would rise up, Adolf Hitler, and through his own ideas, he would try to wipe out the entirety of these people, the Holocaust. And how would they survive? How would anything be left at the end? But they knew that even in a concentration camp, you could take Passover. And they did. And there they would tell the story again of who they were. And that no one takes that away from us. See, parents have the power to root our lives in a larger story. And so we are wise to look upward, not just behind us. That's the gist of why we honor parents. Because if you only honor downwards, you will lose who you are. You have to learn to honor upwards, from where you came from those who see the larger story. And secondly, and similarly to this, I believe that honoring our parents roots our lives in the wisdom of life's larger perspective. It's just wider. Just as we get older, come on, we all know this. Even if you're very young and you're here today, you would say that you understand a whole lot more than you did 5 years ago. Life just keeps getting wider. You understand more. You see more. And that's a big part of what it means to honor our parents. One of the most common jokes in our culture, right, is kind of the joke about how when you're really little, you think your parents know everything. Then you become a teenager and you realize they don't know anything. And then you have this moment as you emerge into adulthood where you go, oh my gosh, they actually know something. And you kind of don't know what to do with it. And yet if you become a parent, you have that moment where you go, oh my gosh, my dad was right. Oh my gosh, I said the same thing my mother said. You don't know what to do with that. Because we go into this place where, and here's the thing, it's never really about us realizing that our parents are smarter than us. You may be in many ways more versed in things, more intelligent than your parents. But the reality is they have a wider perspective. And that wider wisdom is why the scriptures tell us to look to them because they can root us in things. In Proverbs 1:8-9 it says, pay close attention, friend, to what your father tells you. Never forget what you learned of your mother's knee. Wear your counsel like flowers in your hair, like rings on your fingers. He's saying, this is a prize. You don't understand. But the more you listen and the more you learn, even if you don't agree with all, but whatever you can draw, the more that you will be mature beyond your years. That's what a lot of people say to someone. Wow, they're just mature beyond their years. It means they've grasped some things that aren't always quickly grasped at this age or stage of life. Where does that come from? It's the prize of having learned to listen wisely and drawn from what you can. So parents have that power to root us in that. And thirdly, honoring our parents roots our lives in the appropriate submission of our wills. And I mean, anyone who knows me knows I'm a rebel kind of deeply at heart. My whole young life was about just rebelling against things. But if there's anything I've kind of learned in that process, the truth is my parents helped me, and we're always wrestling with by needing to kind of submit my will in an appropriate way to them. And a lot of what I did just wasn't appropriate in rebelling, and you have to learn that. And the truth is, if we learn that in the roots of our own home with our family, and I say appropriate submission of will, but if we learn that, it will go well, and if we don't, we're going to struggle our whole lives with an appropriate submission to any authority, and ultimately to God. This is a deeply profound part of life. The truth is, and I think and I hope that you're starting to grasp, as I am, that I am not the center of the universe, and neither are you. And the universe does not revolve around your will. The only choice you have is to align your will with the will that it does revolve around, and that is God's will, and bring our lives into His orbit. That's a hard thing to do. It's always hard for me. But in relationship to my parents, I can begin to learn this, that there's a place in which their will should matter, and if it's appropriate, and I should bring myself to that. And that's, again, a very challenging thing for us to come to, but it's an essential part of life. And similarly, fourthly, I think another reason why there's value, what's essential to life, is that parents root our lives in life's dependency. We don't like being dependent. It's never something we particularly enjoy, probably. But the truth is we begin life entirely dependent, right? I mean, like totally dependent. Like we're not doing a whole lot for ourselves dependent. And then at the end of life, we have needs as bodies grow weary and have limits by which we need the care of children or others to help care for us at that stage of life. And in between, in the adult years, we live with total illusion that we're not dependent. They're like the total deceptive years. We think we're not dependent. But life is fundamentally dependent. Did you create the air you breathe this morning? Do you hold the world in its action? We are totally dependent. And life's about dependency. And it's something we fight, but it's true. And our way of looking at it, I think, is that we think that there's two different kinds of creatures. There's children and there's old people. And if you're a child, you look at old people and go, they are a different type of creature, not one that I choose to be. And when you're older, you look at children and go, they are a different type of creature. How did, that little, oh my God, I was never like that. Somehow we separate ourselves. And we don't like the dependency we see at both, but here's the reality. It's one creature. God says, you're one creature. You're just at two different ends, stages of life. And all of life is fundamentally dependent. And your ability to come to terms with it is sometimes a part of coming to terms with reality. I want to share with you a short little video that captures this well. There's a subtlety to it, and you'll have to, if I hope, be able to see the larger screen for some of you, to be able to read the captioning that's in English on the bottom. But I think this captures it well.
Τι είναι αυτό?
Ένα σπουργίτι.
Τι είναι αυτό?
Μόλις τώρα στο πατέρα, σπουργίτι είναι.
Τι είναι αυτό?
Ένα σπουργίτι είναι, πατέρα. Ένα σπουργίτι. Σπου-γι-τι.
Τι είναι αυτό?
Γιατί το κάνεις αυτό το πράγμα, μπορείς να μου πεις? Τόσες φορές σου είπα, είναι ένα σπουργίτι. Δεν το καταλαβαίνεις. Πού πας?
Δυνατά.
Σήμερα ο μικρός μου γιος που πριν λίγες μέρες έκλεισε τα 3 καθόταν μαζί μου έξω στο πάρκο όταν ένα σπουργίτι ήρθε και κάθισε απέναντί μας. Ο γιος μου με ρώτησε 21 φορές τι ήταν αυτό και του απάντησα και τις 21 φορές ότι ήταν ένα σπουργίτι. Τον αγκάλιασα τρυφερά και τις 21 φορές που μου έκανε την ίδια ερώτηση, ξανά και ξανά, χωρίς να εκνευριστώ, νιώθοντας στοργή για το αθώο μου αγοράκι.
We grow frustrated by dependency with something we think we want to outgrow. You will not. You're not God, you're dependent. That's Humanity 101. And parents can root us in that because one, we were dependent on them, and two, they will become dependent on us. And they are us at some point. So these are all the things in which we learn to upwardly deal with authority. We learn upwardly to deal with our dependency. And so they shape and form us as people living in the reality of who we are. And these are all the ways in which, therefore, we need to ask then how do we honor our fathers and mothers? What does it look like to honor them? The word honor means to make something weighty. It's how you add weight or substance to something. So it means do not take your parents lightly, because the truth is an object that has weight to it is something that does affect you more. You give weight, you give substance, you give importance to it. And something that's lighter, it doesn't carry that for you. And so if I was to have this stool versus this piece of paper, and I was to walk up to you and say, catch, which one of them are you going to react to? Not the piece of paper, you fling it away, you dismiss it. It's not, it's not probably gonna, but the stool, you'd probably go, whoa, you're throwing a stool at me. It has weight to it. And that's the truth is that it means you give preference to that. And we're to give preference to our parents. It means that they will have more influence in our lives than other people. It doesn't mean that they're the only ones by any means. It doesn't mean that they deserve it. It means, though, that the role they should have, if they bring anything to their parenting, if they show up and have something right, is for them to have that place and that space of preference. And so it is, how do we do that? How do we give them that? Let me mention a few things. And I know that these are hard depending on. I've had enough discussions from the 9 o'clock gathering to know how hard it is and run deep. But I think that God speaks these words because there is potential. There is potential to honor our mother and father despite where we may have come from. But I understand there's a lot to navigate. The first thing I think we can do in terms of how we honor, and it may be surprising because it seems maybe counterintuitive, but it's this: to honor God first. We completely lose the simplicity of this when we realize that this statement was made after the first 4 commands, and God spoke these commands and says, honor me above all. Then he comes to saying, honor mother and father. And the truth is that we need to hold and grasp is that God is the only one we honor as our ultimate source and center of life. It's not our parents. They are secondary to that. They are mediators of the things of God. But God is the ultimate source and center of your life. Honor that. He is the only one who is the perfect one of that as well. And that's a good thing. And we need to set that right and honor him for what he is. We never usurp that. And this is why what we find is that Jesus comes and makes these what seem like hard statements to hold together. Jesus says we should honor the second commandment. He makes a big deal and he lives it out. He honors his mother even as he wrestles and at times does not agree with her. But he ultimately honors her. We could learn a lot from looking at his life. It's profound. But so he tells us to honor, yet he makes statements like this that we read in Matthew 10 where he says, for I've come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone, then he explains, who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. When's the last time you saw that on a Hallmark card, huh? Like, could you imagine Mother's Day, you open that one, it's like, what? It's not there. It's probably not going to be there, or it didn't sell well. But the truth is, what he's saying is not hard for those in first century culture to understand, because it was the nature of discipleship coming out of Greek culture in particular, where we read Socrates share similar words. He's saying, to be a disciple of truth, to be one who takes a truth as absolute and gives your life to it, you put it above everything, including father, mother. So Jesus is saying, he understands that he's speaking into a culture that says that the only honor that there's to be above mother and father was God. So when Jesus declared these words, they all knew what he meant. He's declaring to be God. This is a declaration of his deity, of his supremacy, and he's saying that he's actually using the very highest of honor, speaking of a mother, father, to provoke the fact that he is part of the one that you honor above it. That's what it means to be his disciple. You give yourself even more to him, not less to your parents. And so he provokes and he calls us to this. And the truth is that if we begin to follow him into life with God, we become better daughters and sons. We will actually honor our parents most. Yes, it means there's times where there will be divisions, but in many respects, we have more ways to bless them when we have a life that knows the blessing of God and can speak back that blessing. I was just sitting with a gentleman a little while ago who's just seeking to learn how to take the blessings that God's speaking into his life and blessing his father for whom that's not known. So we need to honor God first and let these things rise from that place and understand if that in any way that what the will of our parents is that which is destructive or abusive or what have you, then no, of course, we do not join that. It is not some kind of carte blanche sense of honoring everything they say or obeying everything they say. We honor God first in all ways. And secondly, we are to respect their position. We're to respect their position. And by that I mean that the part of giving weight is giving weight to the position of a parent, not to the performance of a parent. God knows our parents are not perfect. God knows that none of us as parents, if we're parents, are perfect. But there's a position that itself bears weight. It bears respect. And even if one says, but that's not been done well, it still is that. We don't dismiss it or become cynical. The truth is, even if we're frustrated by the parenting, we're frustrated and shouldn't become cynical of parenting. We should say we're frustrated because it is so significant. The role has weight to it. That's why if you go to a courthouse and you see the judge and you say, Your Honor, when you refer to the judge or speak to them or give them that title, Your Honor, is it because you think they're a really good judge or you like their personality or you get along great? It's none of the above. It's just because that is a title that seems due to the position that they are in. And in some ways, we need to learn that even when there's maybe been little that we can grasp, there is still a position that our fathers and our mothers held or were to have held that itself is something to carry honor for. So respect their position. Thirdly, accept them and affirm what is good. As we emerge into adulthood, I know that we oftentimes kind of see, you know what? Our parents were not gods. Like, I thought they were so cool. They're not that cool, and they're not even always that right. And there's a lot of things about them I'm discovering I don't really respect, or I'm not as enamored about, or they didn't know everything. And at that point, we can want to dismiss them, but this is where I think we're wise to say, this is also an opportunity to accept them, because it's part of accepting that nobody's perfect, and it's part of finding the grace in life. And so we learn to accept another. We need to do that with our parents. It's what honors them. And particularly, and I'll mention these three quick ways. One is to listen patiently, to have the power to listen patiently, knowing that there, amongst all the silly things they say, and say too many times in some of our cases, they're saying some things that we should pause and listen for. They're saying something that is going to be very helpful to our lives. Most of us would know of the famous basketball star Shaquille O'Neal. When Shaq was first drafted, he was being drafted #1 into the NBA. And so when the draft event, the big weekend where they're all there and all the honors are given and they pick the name and where you're going to be drafted to, when that weekend came, they were interviewing him because this guy had just turned 20 and he was going to probably be earning $20 to $30 million contract. So there was a lot of focus on this young guy. And they said, gosh, how did you get here? And he said, my father. And he tells them about his father. And his father was there. And then he shares how he went up to the hotel room, and there he came in the hotel room where his father was sitting, and his father was crying. And he said, what's the matter? And he said, you listened to me. You listened and obeyed. That's all you had to do. That's what his father grasped at the moment. That all the listening that he had done had led him to this. And then Shaq starts to cry, and he says, that's right. He said, I'm here because he taught me not just basketball, he taught me life. And I listened. There's power to honor when we listen. Now, I know that means we have to listen to a lot of stuff that's like, I don't get it. It's kind of random. In fact, not even particularly wise. But there is more there if we will listen patiently. And thirdly, and secondly, with that, we need to disagree respectfully. The truth is, there's different ways to disagree, and we can disagree today. We're living in a culture we are the masters of cynicism, right? We're masters of sarcasm. So everything comes off flippant, sarcastic. It tries to make you feel good when you can be extra sarcastic and witty. But actually, it's very destructive. And it's very destructive to relationships. And we're paying a huge price for it, especially when it's in the wrong context. The scriptures tell us in 1 Timothy, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father, older women as mothers, meaning distinct. Do it distinctly. This person is not for you to speak that way of. They deserve more weight, more honor. Do not speak harshly. And the truth is, we all know there's ways we can disagree more respectfully. And that's a part of how we build relationship. And lastly, bless rather than curse them. We need to know how to speak blessing rather than cursing. And the truth is, again, as a culture, I feel like this is one of the huge elements that we just don't grasp when we need to. And that's the power of our words. The power of our words to bless, which means give life, and to curse, which means to denounce life. And the scriptures tell us, you have no idea that the highest price you can ever pay that's worthy of death was to curse one's parents. To denounce death upwardly to them. Wrong. You're cutting yourself off from the land of the living. We need to learn how to bless. Now that's hard. And a lot of us, to be honest, we have lots of reasons to curse. And maybe it's hard not to want to say, damn them. But we would do well to learn that if we don't have something positive, maybe we need to kind of wait and look and try to grasp what we can speak to, what we can bless in them. And fourthly, we need to extend grace and forgiveness, which kind of flows from this. The truth is, there's going to be deep hurts that can come for some of us. And I know for some, it's overwhelming. I know and would understand if someone said, I just can't imagine being able to ever forgive or restore in any way my relations with my parents. I mean, they walked out, they abused, they've done worse. I am spending my whole life for some just trying to survive sometimes. And I know it's for some, there's forgiveness that can come quickly and over small things. For some, this is a lifelong journey. But my encouragement to you, don't get off the journey. Don't stop. If you give weight to somebody, it means you take them seriously. And the truth is, every time that you have conflict with somebody, we do this unconsciously, we decide how much weight we're giving it. And if you don't give much weight to it, because it's like, I don't know this person, we met yesterday, and I don't know, just kind of put off. What do? You just dismiss them, because it's not really worth it, right, to try to restore it. But if you go, wow, this is a really significant relation, this is somebody who I'd like to be, we were meant to be friends for life, or they're my partner, or whatever, then what do? Then you kind of go, this has got a lot of weight to it, and you seek to restore it. So what it's saying is, don't take lightly restoring in some way, setting right your relationship with your parents. Maybe there's things you need to say. Maybe there's things you just need to let go of that you carry in terms of their indebtedness to you. It's saying, don't take this lightly. You just had someone who was just saying, look, I just, nope, just can't go there. And my only question to them is, when will you? It's up to you, but when? How long do you want to carry it? There's some place in which we need to work, and it's hard, but I think it kind of begins with opening our hearts up to just grace and realizing I'm imperfect, not in the same way they were, but I'm not perfect. I need grace. And when you realize you need grace, you need forgiveness, you need some mercy, it begins to open up space for you to relate to them in that place. So I invite you just to open up your heart to God's mercy, God's grace for these things. Fifthly, we honor them when we care for their needs. At some point, at some point, if our parents reach an older stage in life, they're going to have a need for our help. And when you're really young, it's hard to imagine that, and we don't really want to look at it, but as we're reminded here, the truth is, whether it be our minds or our bodies or our ability to manage all our affairs, there's going to be a need. And God wants the children to rise up and again upwardly bless the need of those who once cared for them. It's part of embracing one's role. And the scriptures are very clear that children have the role of doing that for their parents. And I think sometimes we live in a culture that is so losing that. And I don't want to just get off to be simplistic about what's involved, but I do think there's a real spiritual principle here that if we neglect this role, it will not go well with us. We're breaking out of a role and a responsibility we bear. And sometimes we kind of almost misuse our religious or spiritual lives to do this. Well, God's my thing, man. I'm just so into God, I don't know. I kind of moved on from my parent thing, It's like, what? Jesus heard the same thing. There's a point in Jesus where Jesus confronts in Matthew, it's also in the Gospel of Mark, where it says that he confronts the Pharisees, and what he confronts them about is this. He says, you have actually done the worst of all things you could do. And it was to dishonor this responsibility of children to care for their parents. And how so? They had developed a vow called korban. And that vow is how you could take all your belongings, or some of them, and you could dedicate them to God's use. So children were taking all that they had by which they should have been providing ultimately for, and their parents would come into their need in life and they'd say, I can't help you because I dedicated it all to the temple. And the temple would accept this, and the children could still live off of it, and everybody was satisfied except the parents were completely neglected. And he says, how dare you do that? How dare you fail to honor God's heart and the role that he's called you to honor your parents. You need to be caring for them. And some of us need to be struck by this. And the Apostle Paul, he takes this up to the early church, and he's saying to them, hey, everybody's trying to expect that their parents are going to be somehow taken care of by others. Wait a minute. If you've got children, that is where this should happen. So we read in 1 Timothy 5:4, he says, if a widow has children or grandchildren, this is instruction to the community, these should learn first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. And that is the principle that is carried, that we are to care for them. It's our role, it's our responsibility. Now, that's a principle that we find, and everybody as an individual or a family has to stop and say, what does that look like for us? How do we rightfully care? We're not to dissolve our whole distinctive as people. We're not to lose our own sense of family that we created. We're not merely to just hurt our other people for the sake of them. But how are we to work this out? How are we to think about how we can care in an appropriate way with whatever means we do have? And I know that's different for everyone. But the principle of caring is a significant and center to that. And you might think, well, they don't deserve it. Yeah, I know a lot of parents who don't. They really don't deserve the care of their parents. I know a lot of kids who have cared more about their parents than their parents ever cared about them. But at some point in life, you're going to have to face the fact, or you'd be wise to, that you got to stop asking what's fair and ask what's right. Because if you try to ask what's fair throughout life, you'll go crazy. You'll be very frustrated. But what's fair is not the highest value. What's right is. And sometimes it's a lot easier to answer that question. So we need to ask what's right, not just what's deserved. Sixthly, and lastly, remember them after they are gone. Remember them after they're gone. That's part of honoring them, is how we continue to carry them within us. I know that some here, like me, you know that your parents may have passed on, or one of them may have passed on, or maybe you hardly ever knew them. And it's very hard because we're being called to honor. We wonder, how can I still honor? But the truth is, we kind of should know, if we reflect on it, that honor does not end at the end of one's life. In fact, sometimes that's when honor starts to really rise up, as we begin to take hold of and grasp the significance of them. It carries on long after one's life is passed on. And that's something that I know that my kids will learn. It's something that I've learned. 3 years ago this week, right after our gatherings here, I went home, and when I got home, my wife said, "Oh, your dad's on the phone. He wants to talk to you." It had been our anniversary, so I thought my parents were just calling. But no, he called to tell me that my mom never woke up that day. And that just set off so much within me, obviously. And as I spoke with him and over the next hour, and what just rose up was such a deep sense, not only of loss, but I'll tell you, of blessing. And it just began to pour into me the gifts that she had brought, that I was blessed in ways that I had maybe never appreciated, and it never really stopped. I feel more honor for them now than I ever did before. My father would pass only a few months later, in November of that same year, after being diagnosed with cancer. And again, I was overwhelmed by what an incredible man he was, something I knew, but it helped me this whole season to begin to let that shape in my life and in my heart. And it just filled me with a sense of how right, and I understood the weight that they have. 3 years later, I feel that weight. I can clarify that weight more than I could before. 3 years later, if somebody said to me, "You know what? Your dad would be proud of you." You think it means less to hear that? It's never meant more. We need to realize that there's a weight, and the more we grasp it, and the more we take hold of it, the more we will live well, and we will live long. My invitation to us this morning, and I know it's been long, but my invitation is for you and I to recognize that that as hard of a journey it is, and I know, and I felt it 2 hours ago, and I heard it a lot from people. This can be really hard. But you either dismiss it because whatever's painful, we just want to go, whatever, I don't need that, I don't care, and we want to dismiss it. Don't do it. Engage the fact that God is saying, this is reality. They are weighty. They are the most formative force in your life, your mother and father. Do what you want with it, but they are. Good or bad, they are. So learn what it means to find that place of honor. It's not about faking it. It's not about making up stuff. It's not about being trivial about it. It's not about a quick card that you don't care about. It's about finding the healthy place to honor the significance of their position, but also whatever they've done that's good. My encouragement is that this day, don't let it just pass by. It's certainly not this week. This day or this week, stop and say, if I have something unresolved, maybe now is the time to deal with some things that have made it hard for me to honor them. I just had a gentleman who was just telling me, you know what? He goes, I've had conflict with my dad. He told me something, and it was really true, and we're in conflict. And I said, so you listened to your dad? He goes, yeah. And it really helped you? Yeah, what he said was true. Go tell him that. And it was almost like that became the light. Oh, I never thought of telling him that I actually listened to him. Go tell him. What do you think he'd think? I think he'd think that was really something I've never told him. Whatever it is, go and find a way, the card, the phone, if they're still living. And if they're not living, then take time and remember them. Write down the things that you value, the things you can affirm, the things that you know give weight to your life. Think of the sacrifices they made, if they made any for you. And take hold of these things. And let's honor them. Would you stand with me and let's pray together? Would you pray with me? God, we come as a people who we don't know what to do with sometimes the longings that we have to be loved by Father and Mother, and we don't know what to do with the limits. So for some of us who are adults in this room, We pray that you would lead us forward, though, to grasp that weight that roots us in the Lord, so that can help us know that we can embrace the dependency, that we can learn submitted wills. We pray that you would fill our hearts afresh for what it means, and for those that we've called Father and Mother. We pray that you give us courage and a sense of what we might need to do in our hearts to do that. And for all of us, we pray that we would lead us, Jesus, in knowing that we have ultimately one Father above all, one who is ultimately our source and center, and that we might learn that we will honor our parents best when we honor you most. And that all that we would think we would want to say to them, we want to say to you even more loudly. We want to bless your name. Jesus, lead us.